It's a very tricky proposition or assumption, because first, VAT bill has not been passed by Parliament. So it's being assumed that the Parliament will pass VAT bill, which I think is a very, very serious and wrong assumption.
Because the Cabinet Secretary is pushing Parliament for that, right?
Yes, and you know VAT bill is a very political issue. That's because when you talk, there is perception when you talk of things like milk, exemption on milk products and etc. There might be no much effect, but the perception, and you can see the newspapers already screaming of possible rise in costs. And members of the National Assembly, being politicians, may not really buy the idea of the Treasury to increase revenue through that. But as you questioned, for me, I think apart from being worried about the huge deficit and also the huge burden as a result of more borrowing, especially if the borrowing is internal borrowing, it's going to crowd out the private sector.
That's right.
Now, my other concern is I do know that we recommended that we should get more through corporate bonds so that we finance the infrastructure. If that is what we have done, we looked at the estimates, and one line that has increased significantly is the corporate bonds. The bonds. And if it is corporate bonds, I think that is not so bad, but we need to tame our budget and make sure our spending, and make sure that when we borrow to apply to productive sectors of the economy, and not just borrow and waste it. And that leads to the other question of even corruption. We waste a lot on corruption. So it is wrong for us to borrow money and apply it on corruption. But worse still, the Article 203 of the Constitution makes it very clear that we should share the burden and benefits with future generations. We must make sure that whatever we do or the decisions we take now would also benefit the future generation.
All right.
Let me just take a couple of points there that the Honourable Member made. I totally agree. We are leaving a legacy for our children. And right now we're leaving the wrong legacy. Increasing debt is never going to be a good idea. No one is saying that we shouldn't have debt financing. Everyone has debt financing. But it's the levels that we've got to control. Because as you said, 216 billion, bigger than any other ministry, that's a big issue. On the collections, I totally agree with the Honourable Member. I don't think that we're going to achieve the 750 billion or whatever it was that we budgeted for last year. We're way off target, and we will continue to be way off target for the next 12 months, maybe 18 months. I hope I'm wrong. I'm generally a very optimistic guy, but in this case I don't think it's going to happen. Then the question of the VAT bill. To me, that piece of legislation is actually a very good piece of legislation when I compare it to the existing VAT Act. The problem with our existing VAT Act is that over the years we had so much lobbying that we've got in excess of 420 items that are zero rated, in excess of 350 items that are exempt, huge remissions, and a lot of these items don't need to be there. So what the VAT bill tried to do was to address that issue. Unfortunately to me, what it did do was go from the extreme of too many to the extreme of virtually none.
All right.
And I think that's the balance that needs to be found by the House and the Treasury, because it is, to my mind, wrong to tax basic food commodities at 16%, because it is not me and you sitting here that's going to have a problem with this. It's Wanjiku out there. And she's the one who's going to suffer as a result of this. So I think we need to find that balance between too much and too little. And it's possible. Other regimes have done it. The UK still doesn't tax a basic food commodity for human consumption, so we can do it as well. But we must get that bill in, because it is going to be very critical to our tax collection targets.
All right. Now, all we hear about, especially when we discuss this VAT bill, and there's huge ads in the local dailies, I think, over the last 2 weeks, with people planning a protest against this bill. But, all we hear about is, of course, these goods that have been put in, that were zero-rated before: sanitary towels, milk, but all of these basic commodities, including computer accessories. And we'll get to that in a moment, because I have a question regarding that. But really, what are the pros and cons, and why, has this bill come to light? It was first proposed last year, and then here it makes its way again. Let's discuss the bill, the pros and cons, why it's indeed coming into place, what are the shortcomings of the VAT Act, and why the need to have this bill, the good and the bad, for both the private sector and the public.
First of all, any tax system needs to be simple. That is a very fundamental, basic requirement of a good tax system. And in a system where you have a tax law that is not simple to implement, that requires a lot of interpretation, that requires a lot of discretion, then the cost of collecting that tax becomes very heavy. And that has been the problem with the VAT Act that we have today, the VAT law. And as he puts it, that law, if you are an expert in a tax expert or a finance expert or an accountant, you would not be very happy with it. I want to point out that there is a resistance to it coming from two groups of people, I would say. The one group is a genuine group that is concerned, as he rightly put it, that we have even brought in some certain commodities that really we need to ring-fence or cushion, like the basic commodities, the food items and all that. And you've just mentioned the use of computers ceased to be a luxury. Actually, it is a basic commodity now.
It will be in 2014 when we have the laptops program, but we'll get to that.
So now, the thing is that there is also another group that to me is a very dishonest group, a group of business men and women who have been benefiting over the years on this confused system, where you find that there were some exemptions to certain investments that really were not even adding value to this country, but they use it to enjoy the tax benefits. And that's where you find that. I will confess, the last year I attended a session in Naivasha. We were invited to discuss the VAT bill, and I realized that the people who were financing the workshop were actually suspects, and I was not amused. In fact, I told them that I don't think this is really good to call members of parliament to lobby them to support your businesses. So these are two groups of people who are fighting the bill, but for different reasons. But I think, as he puts it, and challenges with us as members of parliament, we need to look at that because it's a good bill. It's going to help government raise more money, but at the same time, it's also going to correct some of the issues that we've been having with the current law. But at the same time, we need to isolate and remove those items that, if we remove from either tax exemption or zero rating, will definitely affect the common mwananchi who is consuming the basic goods and services.
All right, Nikhil, do you agree? There were some areas of the VAT Act, that allowed for loopholes within the private sector?
Well, I think actually any revenue legislation allows that, and that's what I spend my time doing, but legally, I might add.
Yes.
Yes, I think the main point that the Honourable Member brought out here, if the legislation is not simple, you are going to spend your life trying to decipher it, either you as a taxpayer or your practitioner or the Kenya Revenue Authority. We will spend our life arguing in courts, in tribunals, and we won't really go forward. The key thing about the new VAT bill was it was designed to make it simpler and to make the enforcement of that law much, much easier for the KRA and for the taxpayer. Other than making it too broad, bringing too many things into the tax net, I think it's a very good piece of legislation. Yes, like all pieces of legislation, there will be bits in there which I won't like. There will be bits in there which the House won't like. But at the end of the day, if we pass the bill and we go through, there will be, over time, it will evolve. And the areas which are perhaps being restrictive or not as easy to follow will get corrected as we go along. That happens everywhere. There's nothing wrong with that. But other than the VAT bill, and the need for it was we're not collecting what we should be collecting, given that it's a consumption tax. VAT has never been more than 28 or 29% of our total revenue collections, which is ridiculous because everything you buy should have VAT on it. But we need to also look at our other legislation. And I know last year the Honourable Minister of Finance, Mr. Githai, said rewrite of the Income Tax Act. It is critical. Our Income Tax Act is archaic, outdated, has nothing to do with 21st century business. Let me tell you that the first time it mentioned software in that act was in 2009. And that was to give us a 20-year write-off of software, which you can see that it's technologically totally out of date. So we need a complete rewrite of all our revenue legislation, and hopefully the House Budgetary Committee can push for that.
Okay, and indeed, this is just showing how important legislation is, to our daily lives in terms of tax, in terms of how much money we create. What of the sort of lobbying that's happening? Obviously, not like the one that Mheshimiwa says he attended last year with some suspects involved. But to what extent do we have the private sector lobbying the members of National Assembly and saying, working together with them and saying, as businessmen, we feel this piece of legislation, does not work for us. To what sort of cooperation do you think we have? Is it enough? Do we need more?
If I look at it over the last 15, 18 years, I remember in the 90s we used to do a lot of lobbying with the Treasury, and successful lobbying. We used to meet with them, we used to explain what our what the issues were and why we felt it needed to be changed. Okay, it wasn't always successful, but it was a good process that worked. I think that sort of fell away, but I believe that with the Constitution, the one we now have, and the fact that there has got to be a lot of public input into these things, I'm hoping that this is going to turn around and we will get the opportunity to look into these. What I'm concerned about, and I saw this, I'm afraid, with the VAT bill, is that it was almost as though someone suddenly realized that the Constitution says you've got to get public input, so okay, let's have tomorrow a public session.
Right.
This thing has got to be planned. People like myself, other institutes, Kenya Association of Manufacturers, etc., are very happy to come and sit with budgetary committees, with Treasury, to actually point out where the problems are that are making it difficult to do business in the country.
Right.
And that's what the intention is. It's not so much to try and take the tax away or to reduce the tax take necessarily, but to just make it simpler for everyone to deal with the law and make it easier to do business.
And this is what we're hoping in the subsequent years will be a little better. Right, let's just get into some of those details of the bill now, rather of the budget, moving away from VAT. Mheshimiwa, what do you think are some of the areas that require reduction? I was taking a look at the report that was made by your committee. There's 2 billion shillings for irrigation in schools. There's 105 million shillings for greenhouses in schools. And I believe you've raised issues with, some of these. In fact, there's another one that I'm sure would become a controversial one. 278 million to refurbish the Treasury and build a bridge between Bima House and Treasury. And I believe your committee had raised the issues on this. Let's talk about some of these areas of wastage and what indeed the committee can say or do about these areas that you're unhappy with.
If you noticed, where we had, apart from the uniform reduction in hospitality, which hospitality, foreign travel, and those expenses that we thought we started austerity measures from last year, which we did across about 30%. If you noticed the areas where we reined in and proposed huge cuts, it is the Treasury, Parliament, and Judiciary. Why this became necessary is we realized that whereas other spending units or departments or ministries, the Treasury is very keen in reining in on them and giving them a ceiling and making sure that they even get less than they require. For Treasury, they have always had the luxury to get almost everything that they want. The same with Parliament, because it is the legislature who pass the budget, and also the judiciary, of course, have always had their field day. This time round, what we did was to look at the Treasury budget. And looking at the Treasury budget, you realize that there was an element of 4 billion for constitutional implementation. Now, what this meant is there was a period in time, and those of us with the history remember that there are so many commissions which had not been formed. And these commissions were likely to be formed in the course of the year. So we decided to put lump sum amount under a budget line called Constitutional Implementation in the Treasury, so that once the commissions were formed, then the money is released to them. The Treasury continued to carry forward such an amount in their budget, even when now we have almost all commissions running up and running.
Right.
Then get the refurbishment of, we ask ourselves, at this time, is it a priority really to put that kind of bridge between Bima House and why Bima House and Treasury? We ask ourselves, what is the connection? Why should the staff from either side be want to close? And so you look at some of these things, and irrigation to schools, much as it would be a good idea introducing our children to agriculture early enough, but what we call accountability and transparency, some of those areas are gray areas in terms of wastage. And you know, wastage as defined in Public Finance Management Act is expenditure that could have been avoided if due care and prudence was applied. So we looked at some of these budget lines and decided that these are areas where we could save more money and because we want to industrialize as a country, put more money in industrialization ministry. We've promised creation of jobs, 1 million people, the President talked about it, but there is no deliberate and attempt to apply more resources to those areas which are likely to create more jobs. So we, as a parliament, that is what we thought we would do. And also Parliament, you see, we reduced the budget of Parliament by about 5 billion because we think it's achievable. Because if you are asking others to reduce, then you also need to reduce your own budget. And also the judiciary planning to buy plane and all that, really is that their core business. So we felt that the budget had some areas which could be cut, but if we had more time, I think we'd have even done much better. In fact, in my view, I don't think we've ever done a third of what we should have done.
All right.
So,
as opposed to before, and you mentioned this, where the budget would largely pass as is. We know now the National Assembly has a greater role to play in the budget making process. We've just talked about some of these areas where you are concerned about loopholes, about money not being able to be accounted for. So now with these recommendations that these are areas we need to reduce, and you're raising a flag, what then can Parliament do about this? Is Parliament now in a position to say, yes, we know you wanted this, but we are not going to give it to you?
First of all, there are two fundamental things. The benefit of the constitution we have today is that Parliament has moved from a budget approving, that is a very lenient word actually. Parliament was a budget rubber stamping institution.
A conveyor belt of sorts, right?
But right now, the constitution gives Parliament the mandate to actually make the budget. So we can undo and reconfigure the budget, although you also have to be sensitive to the fact that the executive has a mandate to deliver. So Parliament, whereas we have that power, but we have to apply the power cautiously.
It will be punitive, political,
and interfere generally with the government in power, because they had a manifesto and a mandate to deliver to the people. So that is something that you need to be awake to. But Parliament now has the powers, and besides, there is a requirement that 21 days after every month, actually, the law now requires the Cabinet Secretary to be giving us information continuously on budget implementation. He's supposed to give us information about how much has been collected in the previous month and the exchequer releases. So this is an information that needs to be given to Parliament continuously to allow Parliament to apply its oversight role. Further, the controller of budget has also a constitutional responsibility to be giving Parliament quarterly reports on budget implementation. So Parliament has powers that, if exercised now properly and responsibly, then a lot of issues that we saw in the past should be history now.
Okay, all right. What are some of the loopholes, Nikhil, you see where, even when we have a budget that seems good on paper and that will indeed be good for the country over the next 12 months, where is it that we fall short in the country? What are some of those gray areas that we need to, tighten up a little bit?
Well, to me, the principal thing is that we are absolutely brilliant at putting things on paper. Lovely 5-year plans, everything. Where we're failing is on implementing these things. And it's good to hear that Parliament are now going to have a different role in this and move it forward, which I think is important, because we have some great ideas. We have talented people in the country, but we're not actually getting the most out of them, I think. We've got to look very strongly, and I think I've said this already, at making this country an easy place to do business.
That's right.
We're languishing in the bottom quartile of the world, and yet if you look at Kenya as a strategic country, it is right there. It's the gateway to Africa, whichever way you look at it. An airline that services the whole continent, full UN headquarters, all NGOs, multinationals, everyone comes here. We've now got natural resources, but if we do not focus on implementing things and improving our infrastructure, and to me, one Thika superhighway is not improving infrastructure. We need a lot more.
Yeah.
And we need to also look at technology and the business process outsourcing. This country can be a leading place for business process outsourcing. We have got good internet speeds, but we don't have clean power, or we don't have clean telephone lines.
Yeah.
So those, and critically for that industry, if you look at the graduates that are coming out of our universities, there is no accent anymore. You can put them on a phone and you wouldn't know which part of the world they're from.
Exactly, that's right.
And that to me means that we have the pool there to do this, but we don't have the infrastructure. And if you look at economies that have actually succeeded, look at the Southeast Asian economies that have succeeded, it's not because they gave tax incentives. Tax is not the thing that yes, it's a part of the decision-making process, but it's not going to be the be-all and end-all. If you give a big incentive to put up a project in rural Kenya, but there are no roads, no electricity, the project becomes economically unviable. People won't do it. So that's where our focus needs to be for the next 5 years. Let's move, as the Honourable Member said, let's move away from wasteful expenditure to putting it into what is needed to develop the country.
Okay, indeed. Let's talk about KRA for just a moment, because we're getting in views, via Twitter on this issue. Someone saying KRA needs to style up, remove the tax compliance and have IT systems that ID taxes on the spot, making returns easy online. For a businessman, for ordinary mwananchi, is KRA friendly in terms of, paying your taxes and submitting, filling the forms and everything and saying, yes, I am tax compliant?
I've got to be careful here because I've got to work with them.
Yes.
But no, when you compare it to a few years ago, we're much better.
Okay.
They have an online system. It's not foolproof at the moment, but nonetheless it works. They're in the process of putting in a completely new system, which will allow you to do your returns and do your payments and check your account at KRA, which is one of the biggest bugbears the business had today, that we submit data to KRA, we submit returns, and it doesn't get onto the system.
Okay.
So the new system, which is now being piloted at the moment, and by all accounts seems to be much better than what we've got, is going to see that change in how we deal with them. And the ease of, if I don't have to go to Central Bank or to National Bank of Kenya or to my bank to give my check for or do my RTGS for tax payments, if I can do it online sitting at my desk, it's going to be much simpler going forward. To me, the biggest problem KRA has and has had is that it has not been entirely successful at widening the tax net. And that's something that we need to focus very heavily on for the next few years. Actually, we have a huge informal Juakali sector, which is totally untaxed. And somehow we need to bring them into the net. We need to deal with the corruption issue. And I think you were discussing it when you were doing the papers this morning, and the MP mentioned it well. If we don't deal with it, we are losing so much revenue as a result of corruption that we've really got to focus on that and knock it out. And I hope with what the President said that we're actually going to see some action happening on that.
Yes, that's taking place regarding that. Let's talk about devolution for a moment. And, funds and, going from, the national government to the counties for a moment, and the role, of the budget in that process. We understand, of course, now that two things, that the county assemblies will also, present their budgets and their budget estimates, and that, of course, the Auditor General will also be responsible for making sure that the counties remain accountable for the funds. Let's talk about the budget making process and, the trickling down of funds from the national to the counties.
But I'll touch on that, but let me just, in 1 minute, just add on to what Mr. Nika said.
Right.
First, this widening of tax net is very important. I think it needs to be, emphasized over and over again. You cannot have a country where just a few people support the rest of us.
Population.
And take the case of this rental income. I think there is need for support even from the Ministry of Land, so that this information is given to KRA to be able to collect the tax.
Okay.
We need things, these things which are exempted from tax, like capital gains tax. It's really not right to exempt people who make huge profits. I go build a house and get a lot of profits as a result, and there's another tax, and things like that, the shares and all that. I mean, it's just doesn't really augur well. And again, as he puts it, the informal sector and all that. But now let me go to your question. If you look at the Public Finance Management Act 2012, there is the budget process at the county is almost a replication of what the budget process is at the national level. And the county assemblies are supposed to play a role similar to what the National Assembly does at the county level. But one important thing is our counties still don't have the capacity, I understand, because if you look at the budgets of most counties, you realize that it's something close to a wish list. It's to me not a budget, because you cannot have a budget of 33 billion and your income is 10 billion or even less. That to me is not a budget, because how do you intend, a budget should be, you should indicate your revenue, your expenditure, then indicate the revenue, then get, if there is a deficit, you have to indicate clearly how to finance it. But this is because I think our governors, to me, and I get so disappointed when I see governors just grumbling about how much should go to counties, even before we know what are the functions of the counties. The governors by now should have formed what is called County Budget and Economic Forum. That is provided in law. This is a forum where the governor is a chair and all executive committee officers are, committee members are members, and then there's supposed to be representation from the professionals in that county, representation from the business community, the disabled, the elderly, so that these people can sit together and even plan of how the county is supposed to be financed, to discuss the various revenue sources for the county. So our counties are, I think, it is a challenge. I do understand they're just now getting into office, whereas it is important to ask for more resources from the national government. It is also important to put structures in place so that whatever little resources you get, it is used prudently. So the budget process is almost similar.
Funds and function.
Yes.
Funds following function.
Yes.
Okay, and that's important. All right.
We will go back to that.
Just quickly on the counties. This is a huge step. In some ways, this constitution is probably 20, 50 years ahead of our times. County devolution is a great thing, but the critical thing is going to have to be financial management. We have a bad history of squandering funds, so we've got to make sure that they're managed properly. Secondly, these counties have got a limited number of resources from which to get funding. One is the central government, which is laid out in the constitution, but in addition, they can just get property taxes, entertainment taxes, and any other levy entitled by an act of parliament. So what they have got to do is approach their counties as a business. They've got to have a business plan. Revenues must equate to expenditures, in fact be higher. They've got to encourage the private sector. I'm a great proponent that we need to look at private-public partnership because that is the only way some of these counties are actually going to develop. So we bring in private, and it's simple things like putting up a road and saying, all right, for 5 years you can get toll from it.
Okay.
You know, we've done a partnership there, and it can work. But that's the way these counties are going to develop their infrastructure and attract the investment that we want. And what we must avoid at all costs is overborrowing in counties. Yes, they're going to have to, but we don't want to be in a situation where a county ends up insolvent, because the Constitution, God bless it, doesn't actually talk about what happens when a county becomes insolvent. And, you know, we don't know how we're going to bail it out. So we've got to be very careful on that front as well.
Indeed. In terms of just, you know, reining in spending and being sure that the money is going to the right place. Some of the issues that have come up, and, you know, once you have a budget, it's just like in any family, of course, everybody has needs. The civil servants are saying they want a 90% pay hike. Kupet has talked about it as well. They want more money. The teachers would like, you know, better allowances. The health sector has also said, okay, you know what, we want more money as well. And let's talk about this one. I think that perhaps is quite popular with people, and many of them asking about the funds that are being given for the laptops program versus for the teachers. And I think we've gotten this tweet from two people. Ifram is one of them, says, I don't understand why they've allocated 17 billion for laptops and ignored the 15 billion for more teachers, and perhaps that is what we need. And I think Masana Machuka has raised, you know, the same issue as well, to employ, is it 14,000 more teachers for this? What are your thoughts on some of these requests, particularly the education sector? Do you think that's been adequately catered for?
Not really, but let me put it that information technology or ICT is very important, and we can't wish it away. And I think as a country moving forward, we need to think of how to make our generation, our population from very early stage to be computer literate, etc. But I think what fundamentally many Kenyans have been raising, and which is very important, is what are our priorities? Because you see, if you are budgeting, putting in, actually the 17 billion will not even be enough. I really don't know how they are going to implement it with that amount, but it should be much higher. The promise of a computer or a laptop to class 1 going, I mean, those who are going to class 1 next year, I think was a campaign promise, but it is misplaced in my view. And I think these are some of the campaign promises that needs to be explained to the public, and they're told, even though we promise this, but we have since as a country discussed and agreed, because we are no longer campaigning. Now it is delivering services. To even agree that this 17 billion, because first you need teachers. There's acute shortage of teachers in our schools. The infrastructure in our schools are still not sufficient enough. But more importantly, we could start, for a start, you can put computer labs in these schools and have children have rotating lessons, computer lessons. And it will start from class 1 to class 8. Yes. And that, I think, is now the proposal. But if you have a computer lab, for example, it will serve from class 1 to class 8, as opposed to just targeting class 1 pupils.
And even as we talk about computers now, and this brings us back to the VAT bill, which you know, slaps that 16% tax on computers and computer software. How is this likely to affect you know, the laptop project? Once we have, if it is indeed passed by Parliament, I know you say there is no intention for that to happen, but this will then severely hamper, you know, the rollout of ICT in the country, because, like you said, computers are no longer a luxury.
Yes, certainly. I think the reason why the VAT was not being levied on computers was for obvious reasons, to improve ICT in the country. And I don't think we have reached a point where we are now saying we are done with the expansion. Now it becomes a luxury.
That's right.
I think right now we are still at a phase where we should still continue to encourage more of us to use iPads, use laptops, and you can see I'm the only one who is a bit not digital here.
We're a bit analog today, but then excuse me.
But I would put it that still I think this country cannot afford to levy more to put more taxes on computers, because it's going to make it more expensive, and it's going to affect also the budget, like you rightly put it. So those are areas that I think we need to pick from the VAT bill and say these ones we are not going to accept to.
All right. We've talked about some of the areas of reduction, reallocation, areas that we're questioning. What's good about this budget? What are you hopeful about from some of the proposals we're seeing? What makes you happy? What makes you optimistic, Nikhil?
Well, I think our allocation to education, which whenever you look at it is always not going to be enough. I think it was Nelson Mandela who said education is the most powerful tool you can have to change the world. So that I think is a good thing. I'm concerned not enough for agriculture. We need more from that. But notwithstanding that, of course, agriculture may be in other areas as well. It's not necessarily just in agriculture. My real worry, though, is it's a good budget. We've gone through a good system of looking at it. I read the Parliamentary Committee's report yesterday. This is chalk and cheese to what we were doing in the past. So that I think to me is very, very positive. But we just need to keep focused on the fact that there are certain priorities that we've got to focus on, education being one of them, health being the other, and we must not let that slide in any way. We talked about computers, putting VAT, not putting VAT. Yes, it was in the initial instance, it was there because we wanted to get market penetration, get it going, get people more ICT savvy. We still have some way to go, but we've made a lot of progress. So let's now start looking at slightly more focused targeting at things like this and saying, okay, not all computers, maybe if we're doing it for standard 1 pupils, there'll be a different rate or something like that. Something that then focuses on the area where we're saying, this is what we need, and this is where the priority is. Let's not forget the priorities, I think, and I hope this afternoon we don't forget the priorities.
More target-based, zeroing in on the targets as opposed to having, some broader ones. For you?
First of all, I think I agree with him that more resources need to be put to more critical areas like education. Although I have a feeling that we have not done very well in infrastructure. It has, in my view, gone down, although I know some of the functions are devolved to the counties, like road maintenance of certain classes of roads, especially below AB. But still, we needed to have put more money on the infrastructure. The good part of this budget, I saw there was some increase in corporate bonds as a component of our domestic debt. In the past, the bonds were a bit lower compared to other debt instruments. So the bonds, the good thing with the bonds is that they are targeting certain specific infrastructure development, which are more productive to the economy. I also want to put it that something that I think needs to be done is with regards to our pension scheme for the public service. Whereas it is important to save for future, it is a person's responsibility to save for his old age. It should not be a state's entire responsibility. So we need to convert our pension system to more of a contributory pension scheme. I know it is politically sensitive, but sometimes when you want to grow an economy, you have to make decisions that are in the short run are not popular, but in the long run benefits the country. So I would have gone ahead, but in short, look at the health sector. There's been a reduction in terms of percentage of how much is put to the health sector, yet a healthy nation is a productive nation.
That's right.
A lot of that, out of the 98 billion budgeted for health sector, 64 of it is devolved to the counties. The question I want to, and I've spoken to a number of these county chiefs, we seem not to have understood that when function is devolved, it is fully devolved. like now when you talk of the health, the health budget devolved, you have devolved money for health centers and dispensaries, including pharmacies, which means the drugs that we are going to get in our health centers and dispensaries should be procured from the county government. And that is why out of the 210 billion, 64 of it is for health sector, and including even payment of salaries. And I think the cabinet secretary for health needs to issue guidelines to various counties in the country to tell them exactly what has been developed, because otherwise we are going to be really disappointed going into the next financial year. You find there are no drugs in your health center. You ask the national government, will tell you, no, that is a function of county government. You go to your governor and he tells you, I thought the money was given was to construct new health centers.
That's right. And
so we need to understand this.
Okay, yes, and that's important. And I think the doctors' union is also saying they don't want this to be devolved as yet, that perhaps, there's not enough infrastructure on the ground like we've been talking about. Before we even conclude our discussion, from your point of view, corruption being a major one, what do we hope to see in terms of legislation to just seal the avenues of corruption in tandem with the president's tough talk on this issue? What do we hope to see? And like we keep saying on the show, it's not just corruption within the public sector, but within the private sector as well.
In my view, I think corruption has reached a point where we are almost getting frustrated, because we seem to have make several steps forward and then we make so many steps backwards. In terms of legislation, we have made so many steps backwards. If you recall, the law just before the current one, before it was repealed, I think was even much more stronger. But the 10th Parliament, and unfortunately I sat in the 10th Parliament, we watered that bill down, not for any good reason, but I think because of the personalities who are in the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. So I think we need to rethink and relook at that law again now that we are a little bit sober, having come out of that. But apart from laws, because we've had good laws in this country, we are not lacking laws. But
like the case said, we're good things on paper?
On paper. But now, I think we need a little of ruthlessness from the executive.
Okay.
And this must start with the president. We must show that corruption is very expensive. And you must do it through deeds. And this must get the support of the Director of Public Prosecutions, must get the support of the investigative organs, and must also get the support of the judiciary. And the judiciary, you can't blame judiciary wholesale. When you blame judiciary, I don't think this will be sub judice, because if you blame the judiciary for maybe releasing Patni, for example, you have not looked at the whole thing in totality. How was the investigation? How is the prosecution? Because the judge cannot just come from nowhere and put someone to jail. There must be laws. The judge may even find you stealing, but unless the case is prosecuted,
and proven beyond reasonable doubt in a court of law.
But we need to make corruption expensive to everyone, whether it is a public sector, private sector, because obviously most public sector does business with the public sector.
With the private sector, yes.
Yeah, so the private sector, if private sector was not encouraging corruption, you would not have it in the first place. But in my view, I think it calls upon all of us, the president, from the president to our various organs. That is why we decided to give capacity to Director of Public Prosecutions. We need that, and that is why in our recommendation in our budget, we've added DPP, 1 billion. They only allocated 1 billion in that. In fact, it was the crying baby of the sector, the justice system. You find the judiciary has enough money, the Attorney General's office, but the DPP was allocated just very little money. So we have given more money as a committee, as a parliament. We expect the DPP now to come out strongly and prove to Kenyans that really is going to fight corruption. And I think corruption is our main agenda number one.
Right, which indeed hampers implementation of the budget, yes.
But let's just talk about this corruption issue. It's a two-way street, let's be fair here. If you give, someone is going to take. That's human nature. So it's not just the takers that we have to go after, it's the givers as well. But we must do something about it. It is increasing the cost of doing business very significantly. And it is becoming almost as though people are saying, oh, well, got to do business in Kenya, well, that's the way you do it.
That's the way it is, yes.
Which is not a reputation that we want, I think.
Exactly.
So we've got to attack that
Okay.
and deal with it. And the laws, you're right, the original law was much stronger. Let's not water these things down. Let's put them in there and let's go after the people who are corrupt.
Okay, all right. What are the expectations of growth of the economy this year? What can Kenyans look to, and how does it benefit them? I'm huge on that because, sometimes we say we want the economy to grow by double digits, but what does that mean for me? When I'm going to the kiosk or to the shop to buy my commodities. So let's start off with what your expectations are of the growth of our economy over the next 12 months.
I don't think it's going to be very much better than it already is, but 4.5%, maybe 5%. Because as we said right at the outset, we need 2 or 3 years to settle down the constitution, get things going, get our policies right, etc. What does it mean for the average person with with GDP going up? Well, I think the first thing is that you'll find that if the economy is doing well, your revenue collections will automatically go up because people are making profits, consumers are spending, VAT will go up, the collections will go up, etc. That then gives you an ideal opportunity for all the things that you want to do because the revenue is there. So I'm sorry to say this, but I've been saying all along, we cannot pay the MPs what they want today. Not because we don't want to, we can't do it because we cannot afford it.
Okay.
We cannot afford to do it for the Senate and then the governors and then the county assemblies and the teachers, then the doctors. So if our economy takes off, if we get to double-digit growth, which I think we can, then a lot of these wish lists, as they were, these increased pay demands, will be possible.
Okay.
But let's work towards getting there first. We're almost spending what spending before we earn it, which is a problem. I think we need to focus on that at this stage.
Okay. Mheshimiwa, what will it take for us to get there, to get to double-digit growth? Nikhil is saying in the next 2 or 3 years, perhaps. But what will it take for us to get there? What legislation do we need to put in place? What does the executive need to do? The judiciary, the legislature, the Senate, the National Assembly? What do we all need to do to just get ourselves on the right path?
First of all, I agree that with the benefits of a growing economy. If you realize double-digit, apart from increasing the revenue base, it will also help in creating more jobs. Because when we have a higher growing economy, it has to be people producing.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that. But what it takes is it will take us more strategic and targeted application of our revenue to more productive areas. If we are just a consuming country, we are not likely to grow. We have to be a country that really gets its priorities right. And I agree with him. If you put more resources to recurrent expenditures, salaries, etc., then the economy will not grow. The economy can only grow if you are putting more money on energy so that you make cost of energy cheaper, and then you encourage more business people to come in and invest and all that.
And of course,
when you encourage, when you encourage the infrastructure in terms of the road network, in terms of railways, in terms of making business environment conducive. In fact, one mistake that we have been making in this country is of thinking that government the role of government is to create jobs on its own. Government is not supposed to create jobs. Government is supposed to provide an environment for private people, for business people, for people to invest so that they create more employment. So I think we just need to reorganize our budget in a way that we put more resources to more productive areas to give us to be able to realize a faster growth. And of course we have spoken to so many of these areas, including ICT, including the energy sector. We have talked about infrastructure, the road infrastructure. That in my view would help us.
And you see 4.5% growth as well?
Well, I see, but you see the projection, unless I'm wrong, because it's supposed to be spelled out this afternoon, the projection is too ambitious. I think it's 5.6, which I don't think we are going to realize.
Okay.
I do know that last year was a bit difficult because there was pessimism from the investors and all that. But even immediately to realize such a jump in economic growth may not be realized. So I see it under 5%, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. We thank you so much. And of course, we look forward to that budget reading that's at 3 p.m. and of course a lot of work now for the National Assembly after that budget reading today. Thank you for your time this morning, and Nikhil, thank you as well for talking about this from the private sector view and indeed discussing the VAT bill. I think we now have a better understanding of it, what's good about it, what's not good, what's working, what's not, and we do hope indeed, as Honorable Mbadi says, that changes will be made to this bill before it is passed, so that you and I, the common Mwananchi, would be able to still benefit from all of those incentives that would be there. We await to see what happens at 3 p.m. this afternoon. That's it for Bunge this morning. When we come back, we will be talking about the Day of the African Child that's coming up later on this week. Do stay with us.